Some albums are truly journeys, some short, some meandering, and others like this album are odysseys of ideas that really just flow out of the artist. And in the case of Louis Cole, as a follow-up to 2018's Time, Quality Over Opinion serves as a development on previous ideas and a setting for experiments in multi-instrumental composition. Hi there everyone, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawalker, your host, and today we're going to be checking out this new album from Louis Cole, Quality Over Opinion. Like I was saying, this album is a journey. It is quite long and it touches on a lot of different sounds and styles over its 70-minute long runtime. And most of the material here ranges from great to good, though with the plodding pace that this album runs with from track to track, it can be a little bit hard to get through in one sitting. I found myself having to step away because there are a lot of points that do fail to hold my attention, especially into the later middle half of this album, which is pretty good material, but by this point the album has mostly shown off what it has had to show, with maybe one track that brings something truly new and outlandish to the table with Let Me Snack right in the thick of things, with its, dare I say, Death Grips-like second half, which is a bit of a speaker ripper, very much sonically similar to Bubbles Buried in This Jungle. But past that, this album over its 20 tracks feels coherent in a few parts, as if the majority of the songs form separate suites, though even that at points doesn't really stay consistent. Like the first 4 songs on the album, Quality Over Opinion, Dead Inside Shuffle, Not Needed Anymore, and Shallow Laughter, while not all the most similar, still feel like they've got a strong flow one into the next. Quality Over Opinion as the opener is this really dramatic string piece with these lyrics that are weirdly self-analytical and often bizarre, to the point where the surrealism becomes humor, especially over top of these beautiful strings. And again, there is a lot going on with these lyrics that seem to be battling between being very serious and poetic, but also pointing out the surrealism of the whole track with these very pointed lines where Louis Cole is talking about how he spends quiet moments trying to radiate light and energy to become a star, probably in more of a metaphorical sense, but then sort of looks at it in a third person and says, I realize that I am an asteroid riding cum bubble that hit the right temperature rock. The song builds and heads into a very familiar sound with Dead Inside Shuffle, which leans into a lot of these concepts just in a bit more of a palatable way, with these great juicy bass lines and these keyboards that really jump right out of the mix nicely. And it is pretty par for the course for Louis Cole at this point. While I find a lot of the themes on this album very relatable, I do also think a lot of the stuff here is kind of samey, if not like a slightly more nuanced look at a lot of the same ideas that he's been tapping since the last record and even before. And it's not really like this is the worst thing. In fact, it's one of the most consistent things about this album, be it themes of nihilism or the fear of abandonment or just feeling like the absolute pinnacle of the human species while simultaneously wanting to claw your own skin off. It makes me just wonder how far this is going to be taken past this project, because thematically, while I like these songs, I'm pretty much over it as soon as it starts. Not Needed Anymore and Shallow Laughter are both slower, more low-key pieces that I feel like are the final touch for this first suite, that with Shallow Laughter again ends on a very beautiful note as kind of a bookend with Quality Over Opinion. This then leads into the next segment of the album with Bitches, which gets a lot more poppy, a lot more funk and jazz heavy for sure, with some insanely infectiously catchy synth and bass work. There's also some very killer drum work and some shrieking saxophone. This leads into Message, which I like, but I find is a little bit dry, with these very dreamy passages that don't really draw me in very well past the first listen. Failing in a Cool Way is this crazy aggressive track about being stoked that someone is doing way worse than you at life. Like, your life certainly isn't on track and you acknowledge that you are kind of a total turd, but it's awesome that the person you just loathe is doing terrible. Definitely one of the better cuts here, not just because of the cynical lyrics, but also this heavy, heavy jazz instrumentation, which is just some of the most out there on this whole album. Disappear is one of the slower tracks here that I do like quite a bit. I am enjoying the almost samba beat with these very subtle rolls on the hi-hats and generally quiet instrumentation. I can dig the sleepy vibe. The midpoint of this album has one of the longest cuts with I'm Tight, which is like 7 minutes long and doesn't really always feel like the most necessary track, especially when you directly compare the vocal melodies on this track to some of Cole's previous material like Real Life, which at points feels like more than just a callback. I do like the whole ego trip that is this song, though, of being unapologetically weird and not giving a shit about what people think of your output. It's just kind of based. At this point in the album, there are a lot of tracks that start to feel pretty unremarkable, especially because the sound of these songs vary wildly, like True Love, which leads into Planet X, which is a pairing that just doesn't work very well. Mostly in that True Love is maybe a little bit too grounded, but Planet X is this like way more bombastic jam, which, like I'm Tight, feels a little bit too close to In in this case, Weird Part of the Night off of Time. The drum section, I mean, is like really similar. And it's not a bad thing. It's just another thing that I can't really not hear. Like, yes, it is the same artist. It's going to sound very similar, but in this case, it is very close to that song. Anyway, Planet X is fun, but nothing new. Let Me Snack, like I said earlier, is one of the only moments on the second half of the album where it really feels like the gloves come off and there's some really intense and somewhat feral electronic work, which is kind of weird because that ferocity doesn't really come out until about halfway into this track, which starts off pretty deceptively as kind of like a horny track, then devolves into knuckle-dragging waves of angry noise, which is just fantastic. Forgetting is kind of forgettable. It's fine, like maybe a little bit sentimental, but this track is short, seems like a little bit of a dedication to Los Angeles at nighttime, and that you can kind of forget certain details, which is nice, maybe a bit relieving. Park Your Car on My Face, to my ear, is a bit of an elaborate metaphor for having someone sit on your face, which at some point seems like it may also be a literal request to have someone crush your skull with a car. Again, the nihilistic blended with the horny. Classic. Don't Care is probably my least favorite track here. It's like 5 minutes of music that I genuinely think is mostly skippable, with the exception of some okay synth work at the end of the song. Laughing in Her Sleep is a really great, slow, sweet, and romantic track about the mystery of what someone is laughing about in their sleep and how it's kind of part of the fun of being in love with someone. Outer Moat Behavior feels a bit like a house track, like it's short, but still is a bit much even sitting under 2 minutes long. It's not really adding much to this experience, it's just kind of there. When is a very soft, very slow track, which again hits on the sentimental, which is kind of okay, but doesn't really feel like it tops any of the other slow tracks on this album. I'm also not super into the late 2000s production on this track. Lots of weird, not great vocal filters, and an instrumental that I think would be better if it really didn't have any lyrics accompanying it at all. Let It Happen is another fairly long track for this album, and like the last song, When is very much a slow burn. In fact, the last segment of this album, from When to the final track, Little Piano Thing, is just incredibly soft, very pleasant, not the most memorable, but certainly a solid closing suite. I mean, really, this whole album just has a tendency to jump from one very high-strung, almost stimulant-ridden sound to this very low-energy, low-key style, which ends up not really working all that well, especially for the flow, which to me is kind of unfortunate because with the amount of material here, they very easily could have structured this album from the higher-energy songs to maybe the more low-key tracks, or the other way around, but as it sits, it jumps around like way too much for comfort, not to mention that a lot of these slower tracks feel very much like unneeded fluff on an already 70-minute long album. I think that there are some killer takeaway tracks here, like I'm really loving Quality Over Opinion, Bitches, and Failing in a Cool Way, but past that, even the tracks that have been enticing me more than others still feel a little bit underwhelming on top of the songs that I just don't really care for or do much for me at all, like Forgetting or Don't Care. I think from the start, this one was going to be a very obvious mixed bag, but it really is a shame that there is just so much here that I'm not really particularly stoked on, especially when Time was generally way less of a mess. Quality Over Opinion is a solid 6. Thank you all so much for watching. Please let me know what you thought of this album in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe. And if you like what I'm doing here, drop a tip in the PayPal, check out my Instagram, my Reverb, and my Depop. Links to all of those are in the description below. Thank you all so much again, and we'll see you on the flip side.